Hey guys, so I thought I'd try something sorta new where I basically take my concept of the tier list by the data that I typically do, but apply it to extra deck monsters this time. As usual, a big shout out to my sponsors, links in the description below. So the formula to calculate the tier score is by and large the same as the one I use for the side deck staple tier list, and I'll provide links to all the relevant videos below so that you can learn more about how the score is calculated. Basically, I'm looking at the top 25 most played extra deck monsters in the last 7 days on Dueling Book based on YGOscope.com, and I'm looking more so at non-archetype specific extra deck monsters only. So for example, I wouldn't include Sky Striker Kagari or something like Chi from Sword Soul. This does get a bit arbitrary on what I include and don't include though, so it is not perfect, and I'll explain that later in the video. Obviously, the formula will be giving more weight to extra deck monsters that are played in the most meta decks, but at the same time, if there are more top decks that are playing a certain extra deck monster, then that card probably deserves to be ranked high. I also usually include the percent representation of the card from the recent topping list in the latest Premier event, but this time I unfortunately didn't have time to analyze the North American TCG Championship list, so I'm going to base this purely on Dueling Book data only, and I'll actually see whether I continue doing this anyways for future extra deck tier list videos. As for the categorization of the extra deck monsters, the breakdown will be the same as all my tier list videos, so again, I'll provide the links down below so you can learn more about this so I don't have to keep repeating it for my returning viewers. So let's get right into the extra deck tier list. Starting at number 1 is no surprise, Crystron Halqifibrax. Probably will get banned at some point, but this guy has been nothing but trouble since coming out, enabling really easy combo plays by specialing out a tutor for the deck, and is really an extra deck staple for so many decks. Next we have Barone, which by and large was seeing most of its play in Sword Soul initially, but there are various other combo decks that make use of this card. A level 10 synchro that has become a common staple that not only provides an Omni Negate but also a pop on your turn, and is sort of a mini Dragoon. I think it has overtaken Borreload Savage as the best generic synchro Omni Negate. Then we have Chaos Ruler, which up until recently was seen play just in Dragon Link, but now all of the Punk variants are making really good use of this card as well. It has even come up as a potential ban-worthy card on the next list, as milling 5 and potentially getting to add a card is pretty insane, especially in Punk where you can chain block it as well. Then we have some of the Albaz fusion monsters, and while you can argue that this is archetype specific, there are so many other decks that use branded engine that I felt it was appropriate to include this, as well as a couple of other Albaz extra deck dragons. Albion is never the end goal but a branch to get you to Mirrorjade, but also to be sent off from the extra deck to be able to add that branded fusion or set that branded in red. Speaking of Mirrorjade, we have that next, and it's such a powerful boss monster that is summoned in any branded strategy, and I think is well worth the top tier spot. Not only does it banish without targeting, but it also sends from your extra deck as cost, which gets you great value, and on top of that, can nuke your opponent's field when they try to out this card. Crazy good with multiple amazing effects, but also is a strong monster to boot. Now let's move on to tier B, and we have Access Code Talker, which is an incredible extra deck monster in its own right. A lot of decks can play this card, and it is something that Power Crept Boral Sword as the Link 4 finisher. Can't respond to its effect to gain attack or pop, so that's pretty insane, and like I said, is generally going to attack you for a game, especially in something like Salamangreat where it can attack twice through Update Jammer. Then we have another Albaz extra deck monster in Lubellion, which admittedly is worst of the 3 listed, but still played a lot in decks that play the branded engine, because this one requires a dark monster to be sent, and that means it can send something like Shaddoll Beast so that it can draw and go into something like Winda, or Necroroll Banshee and get you access to Zombie World. Keep in mind that I decided not to include Masquerade Dragon here, as that one is more specific to branded Despia, whereas these 3 Albaz dragons are commonly seen in any branded variants. Next we have Splash Mage, which was a bit surprising, but I guess Cyberse related strategies are pretty popular nowadays. Originally this card was used to turbo into Transcode Talker and then Access Code Talker, but now that we have Heat Soul, that's what it's used for as well. Great combo enabler and is used in many Cyberse decks. Then we have Link Karibo, which has been one of the most commonly played extra deck monsters since the introduction of Link Summoning. Sort of the go-to Link 1 monster that uses level 1s, the other being Relinquished Anima, but really is there to just get your monster to the grave and not really for its protection effect. Next we have Striker Dragon, which I originally hesitated on including because you can argue it's archetype specific and should not have fit my criteria, but at the same time it is used in other dragon strategies outside of Dragon Link like Pure Dragon Maze or Dragoonity, and in the past has been used in other strategies that uses a small rocket package such as Orcust, so I decided to include it. An amazing Link 1 that gets you boot sector and get things started, and it was limited a while back for a reason. Then we have IP Masquerena, which is an amazing Link 2 that's primarily used to go into Nightmare Unicorn to spin back your opponent's card on their turn. With the introduction of Sprite come Power of the Elements soon, this card may actually see more play. Speaking of Unicorn, there it is, which has been one of the best generic Link 3s since the introduction of the Link mechanic. Being able to spin a card is nice, and has even seen play in Sky Strikers where you go into this and spin itself to the extra deck so that you control no monsters so that you can continue using Mystic Mine. Last in this section is Shooting Riser Dragon, which got limited on the last list and got a lot of people scratching their heads, seeing a lot of play in decks like Punk, but even before that, this card has started seeing play once Snow got unbanned, as you can dump it for an interruption on your opponent's turn, or even something like Banshee to get dumped for Zombie World as well. Not quite sure that it belongs this high though. On to Tier C, we are starting out with Zeus, which honestly hasn't seen much play nowadays compared to previous formats like when Tri-Brigade Zodiac was Tier 1. You do see Flenderless playing this in the extra, even though they will almost never summon this out, so that might inflate the numbers. Although with the release of Sprite soon, maybe Zeus sees a bit more play since they can go into the rank 2 Sky Cavalry that cannot be destroyed by battle, and then just slap Zeus on top of that to clear boards. Next we have the Zombie Vampire, which I think was typically seen play in Dragon Link, but can also see play in Punk variants as well, and I would assume Zombies would somehow play this. Kinda cool that it's seeing enough play to make it to this list, and has a pretty unique effect in milling both players' decks and summoning from either graveyard. Then we have Appaloosa, which I think has really fallen off in play compared to previous formats, the most recent being when Tri-Brigade was Tier 1 and they almost always ended on Appaloosa. Great for monster negation and is a nice generic Link 4, but in an upcoming format where people will be main decking Dark Ruler, not sure if it will be so hot. Next we have Heat Soul, which is funny that it ended up getting ranked lower than Splash Mage considering that you use it to get into Heat Soul, but perhaps it's because Splash Mage is also used to go into Access Code Talker, and so it has more flexibility. Anyways, Heat Soul has been a great addition to cyberspace strategies, including Salamangreat. Being able to draw 2 cards essentially at least is really nice at the cost of measly 1000 life points each. Then we have Totally Awesome, which obviously will move up way higher on this list once Sprite is legal. As of now, I suppose this is seeing play in Frogs, Marincess, and I assume Sharks, and has always been a great Omni Negate that is a bit interesting since it can also set the card that it negated, which potentially your opponent may be able to use if it's a generic enough card. Did get recently banned in the OCG, so perhaps that happens to us as well once we see the full wrath of Sprite soon. Next up is Salamangreat Almirage, which is honestly a really good extra deck monster, although ironically not for Salamangreat themselves. It's a great card because it can get that normal summon monster into the grave and get your plays going, and was very commonly seen in Tri-Brigade strategies. Does have a protection effect that your opponent can easily forget, not to mention it even has a revival effect that most players will forget as well. Then we have Artifact Dagda, which is not a card that most people enjoy seeing since it enables Scythe locks. Don't think we see this card as much as before now that Anaconda is banned and thus DP is not as prevalent, but there are several strategies still using Dagda and lock your opponents out of their extra deck through Scythe. We then have Herald of the Arclight, which is a card that does not see much play as before, such as during Infernoble format. It is pretty powerful though in various combo strategies since not only is it an Omni Negate, but also forces monsters from the hand or deck to be banished instead of being sent to the grave. Very useful card in Necros as well to add that ritual monster spell. Lastly on this category is Elder Entity Entis, which is funny because this is the only one in the video where you don't actually summon this thing, and quite frankly, I don't think anyone can know off the top of their head what the fusion materials are. Essentially used for something like Dogmatica Punishment or Nadir Servant, where it's sent off from the extra deck directly to pop cards, and Infernoid strategies make use of this card very well too. And on to the final tier category, we are starting with the Dark Charmer. Really good card actually, but I guess has fallen off in play since not as many decks are running DPE anymore, and that was a great card to revive off Dark. The Sprite monsters are Dark, so maybe this starts seeing more play, but at least among the Charmer extra deck monsters, this is probably the best one. Speaking of DPE, this does make it onto tier D. Initially, I thought maybe at this point only hero decks are playing this card, so perhaps it should not be included in the tier list, but there will still be some odd rogue decks here and there that will use DPE and just rely on hard drawing one of the 2 fusion destinies. Really strong card if you can actually get it out, of course, where it gives you those repeated pops, not to mention that Celestial Draw effect is really nice in the grind game situation. And finally is another Code Talker monster in Transcode Talker. Again, related to Splash Mage, it's primarily used to turbo into Access Code Talker, but I think it's also used in Ignister strategies, which I should have mentioned earlier as well. Actually has a targeting protection effect as well, but for the most part, this card never really sticks around the field for long. Alright guys, that was it for the extra deck tier list by the data. Hope you enjoyed that. Let me know what you think about how the formula categorizes the monsters, and whether certain monsters should be excluded or included for this tier list. As always, a big thanks to my patrons, Eileen Dice Queen, Bolt Spider, Cybernetic, Brandon Jaren, Barrelord, Spooky Boogie, and Stephen Phillips as always for supporting the channel. You guys are awesome. If you're interested in joining my Patreon, links down below. Take care guys.